Shall we gather at the river where compassion shines above, with its crystal tide forever flowing from the source of love? Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful gather with the saints at the river that flows from the source of love. On the margins of the river, where the words are held away, we will quest for justice ever till we shining river, bound in love and courage fast, may our vision form a future of a world made one at last. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river, gather with the saints at the river that flows from the source of love. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river, gather with the saints at the river that flows from the source of love. Thank you. Good morning. I'm the Reverend Kevin Tarsa, serving this community if we have not met yet. What a beautiful energy this morning. There's a seat here, looks like a seat there. Who else has a seat near them that's available? Back here, there's a seat. So we're just delighted by this. So Cheryl and I did not coordinate our pink colors today ahead of time. And we just love when that happens. So Randy sent for a pink shirt. This is one of those like really simple delights, right? Those little simple, unexpected delights. So I'm curious, given the last week has felt like 3 months to me. I don't know about you. So how is it with your spirit this morning? On any kind of scale you want to show it, how is it with your spirit this morning? Oh, okay. Wow, lots of in between. Yeah. When people ask how I'm doing, I say, well, given everything, right? There's this caveat, given everything. So I'm glad that we get to be gathering at this river, right? The river of this community and this tradition and our values. The song comes from, it's a classic Christian tune, and what they're speaking about this, in terms of the saints are their fellow members. That's who they're referring to. The people who are members of a religious community, they refer to each other as saints. And in the song in particular, they were talking about in heaven, they'd be gathering at the river as saints. But it's really about just naming that we're here as a community together, right? Gathering around what matters. And today, just for those who care about such things, it may be helpful to know that there's some new name tag designations, and this just may help you know who you're talking to. So there's one for kids, right, with animal pictures. There's a little space for an animal sticker in those. Guests who are here, periodically or for a few times checking us out, get that heart on their name tag. Now, members and pledging friends, what the heck is that about? So members are people who sign the membership book and say they really want to commit to being part of this community and all that it entails, and they make an annual pledge that says, here's the resources we're willing to commit so the congregation can know what it's going to do. There are some people for whom becoming a member is just not comfortable or not comfortable yet, or sometimes there's a practical reason, and so they make a pledge and they agreed to abide by the covenant of right relations, which is our aspirational agreement about how we'll be together. And so those are referred to as pledging friends, right? They actually pledge. There's a strong commitment there, but have chosen not to be members. And pledging friends can do most things except hold some of the offices in particular, or vote in congregational decisions. So just in case that helps you, it helps our greeters know when someone comes in the door, especially a new greeter who might ask, oh, are you new? And someone has been a member for 30 years, right? So I'm going to invite you to greet each other, and you'll have a name tag to look at, or not. So whether you have a youth, a guest, a pledging friend, a member, or no name tag at all, I invite you to say hello in a way that feels comfortable to you, to the people around you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Our January theme has been living love through the practice of story, starting with Sophia's sermon about what stories are told, are not told, or are erased from history. Right here at home, there is no better example than the erasure until recent years of the stories and indeed the very existence of our indigenous people. The basket of black oak acorns that we place on the altar each week reminds us that we are residents or visitors on land that was never given up by the Nisenan people. We commit to help correct their erasure and exclusion from California history and to support their efforts to restore tribal sovereignty through federal recognition. Let us listen to and learn from their stories whenever we have the opportunity.
Thank you, George. This is a story about one of our ancestors, one of our Universalist ancestors. This is a man named John Murray. John Murray lived in England. This was in the 1700s. And when he was young, he was taught that after we die, some people are going to go to heaven and be very happy, and some are not. That was the message. And he preached about that sometimes in his kind of strict church and among his strict family. But there were other people who heard different messages. And there was a young woman in his congregation who had heard a different message that no, everyone's going to go to heaven at the end and be happy. That God loves everybody and everyone's going to be happy. And so John was sent to go set her right. So he was sent to her house. He went for a visit and talked to her and told all the reasons why she should believe the way he did. But for everything he said, she had a reason for believing differently. And by the end, John was totally confused about what he believed. And pretty soon, he started going to listen to people who also said, no, everyone's going to be happy in the end. Everyone is loved. Now, John had a pretty good life. He had a good, happy family. He got lots of education. He had enough money. But then the winds changed in his life, and he lost all his money and was sent to prison because he couldn't pay his bills. And then his young son died when an illness came across the land. And then his wife, and then his 3 sisters, and then his mother. And he was so sad. He said, I am never teaching again, ever. And he wasn't even sure he wanted to keep on going. He was so sad about that. And then someone said, well, maybe what you need to do is start over, find a place to start over. So he decided to come to America, to these shores, and to bury himself in America, he said. So he got on a boat, which was called the Hand in Hand. I'm not making this up. That was the name of the boat, the Hand in Hand. And he sailed across the water to America, where he met another person, Thomas Potter. Thomas Potter was a farmer. So the way these two met was that when John sailed across, the boat was supposed to go to New York. Long story short, it did not. It got stuck in the sand, some say in a storm, some say in the fog, at Good Luck, New Jersey. Not making it up. Good Luck, New Jersey. And so John was sent to shore in a little boat to go see if they could get some food for the people on the boat. First person he met was Thomas Potter, who just so happened had built a chapel right there. And Thomas asked John to come to dinner later, and they did. And Thomas explained that he believed that everyone's going to go to heaven in the end and be happy. And John said, well, actually, I believe that too. And I used to preach about that. And Thomas explained, you know what? I had a dream once. And in the dream, God told me that if I built a church, built a chapel, that God would send a minister. Clearly, it's you. And John said, And Thomas said, come on. And John said, not gonna happen. And then Thomas said, let's make a deal. Because John said, I'm sailing to New York, I can't stick around and preach, And John said, well, if you're still here on Sunday, if the winds haven't changed and your boat hasn't been able to go out back to New York, will you preach on Sunday? And so he did. Now, Thomas had been actually taught those messages by a man named George de Benneville, who had come to this country, and instead of trying to convince the people who are here already that they should believe differently, he decided to learn from them about how they lived, about how they healed people. And so he had passed on this message. So that's where he got that message. And so Thomas said, okay, let's make a deal. If the winds haven't changed and you're still on Sunday, will you preach? And so John said yes. And so they shook hands on it, or something like that. And guess what? The winds did not change. So he preached on Sunday and then sailed on to New York because the winds then picked up, and then went on to preach a whole bunch in this country. So John Murray is one of the people who really helped spread this idea, which was really good news for a lot of people who were hearing a different story at the time. So there's the story of John Murray, and of course, it's created a chalice. I'm wondering if there's anyone who'd be willing to come up and add a little flame to the chalice. Ah, Jax, I knew there'd be somebody. There you go, the starter flame. Thank you, Jax. And with that, I invite Janet to offer our chalice lighting words this morning.
Who We Are Called to Be by Pat Irbe Lichty. Who we are called to be. Our chalice is a reminder that in hard times, our ancestors in faith acted with courage to bring hope and safety, to bring life itself to threatened people. We light it today as a reminder of who we are called to be in a world still dangerous and despairing. With courage and faith, we bring ourselves to the work before us.
Cheryl is lighting our chalice, a symbol of this tradition. And at the same time, with the same flame, we light a light for our young people to take with them to Kids Connection, which Lindsay is going to carry today. And we love to sing the light and our youngest members on their way to the fun that they're going to have.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Community of the Mountains. I'm Cheryl Morris, your worship associate today. During January, our theme has been Living Love Through the Practice of Story. And for this final Sunday, we turn our attention to our Unitarian Universalist heritage. I love that Kevin titled the service Heretics in Good Company. I consider myself sort of a quiet nonconformist. My life outwardly appears conventional, but I've made some choices that have surprised people, even though they know me well. And then I'm surprised that they're surprised. I hadn't necessarily thought of myself as a heretic, but I suspect that's another description that will fit. And how about you all? Nonconformists? Heretics, rebels, freethinkers, renegades, mavericks, eccentrics, radicals. I've been reading the dictionary. However you describe yourself, it seems clear that we value independent thinking, taking responsibility for finding our own truths, and learning from a variety of faith traditions, as well as from science, nature, great leaders, and each other. We work for justice, and we consciously seek to strengthen community. Whether you're a longtime UU, someone who's meeting our denomination for the first time, or somewhere in between, it's always good to understand how we got here. Individually and collectively, There are many stories to be told. Welcome.
Anybody else want to identify as a quiet or not so quiet nonconformist? we tend to draw such people, right? If you're conformist, it's easier to stay where you were, right? In fact, more comfortable, right? So we tend to attract, collect people who are willing to step outside of that, in fact, needing to step outside of it for one reason or another. I invite us to sing one verse of a song that we're going to play out a verse at a time. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit, and we'll get to listen to Randy and Toby play it for us first to hear the melody. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit as you're willing. Sing out praises for the journey, pilgrims we who carry on, searchers in the soul's deep yearnings, like our forebears in their time. We seek out the Spirit's wholeness in the endless human quest. We seek out the Spirit's wholeness. Thank you. Thank you. Today I'm going to do a little bit more narrow dive than normal, just to give us an anchor point for even what the heck Unitarian Universalism is, or what those words mean. Both our parent traditions, Unitarianism and Universalism, were born of heresies. The word heretic, originally from a Greek word meaning able to choose. Our ancestors were Christians who repeatedly chose to believe something different than the dominant or mandated beliefs of the time. Our ancestors kept branching off. In our Starting Point series, which is how people find out more about this tradition and consider moving toward membership, they have found this view helpful. So way on the left there is Judaism, right, out of which Christianity arose. It had its own branches that branched off up there to the top. And then Christianity arose and Roman Catholicism kind of stayed that main central stem, but it already started to branch off into a couple of the Eastern Orthodox Church, for example. And then that big branch with lots of branches, there comes the Protestant Reformation. Because what happened is people had the Christian Bible for the first time in their own language and in their hands, and they could interpret it for themselves. So there were tons and tons of interpretations. So lots of branches of Christianity. And then on this continent, just before that round part, come the Puritans and the Pilgrims, who were Calvinists. Those are our ancestors here on this continent. And the people who stayed most with the kind of the traditional way of thinking were the Congregationalists, going down the middle there to the right. The Unitarians branched off. The Universalists branched off, took their own path, but became later so similar, they were able to come back together and merge and become Unitarian Universalists. That's why the funky branching there. So thank you, Cyprus. Unitarianism and Universalism were not only born in heresies, they are in fact named after their respective heresies. Heresies which at first glance wouldn't seem to have much to do with what matters to most of us now, but there is more to it than is at first obvious. A year and a half ago, I shared a few photos from my trip to Poland. I was studying there some of our ancestors, the Minor Church of Poland, or the Polish Brethren, as they have become known more often now. I spoke of the moving experience of being in buildings where they had met for services in the late 1500s and early 1600s. When there was tolerance in Poland for a time, for their radical beliefs, such as equality for all, education for all, even women, freedom of religion, separation of church and state, pacifism, and the necessity of using our human natural reason to interpret the Bible and religious dogma. Buildings which housed a minister and their family on the upper floors, buildings and a nation out of which they were later driven at the pain of death, buildings that became barns and storage sheds, our ancestors' stories intentionally erased and actually still being held invisible to this day. Lately, in the midst of our own political winds blowing at the moment, I've been remembering singing in some of those same rooms with UU friends and colleagues, singing as I'm sure our ancestors must have done. Looking out onto the world through those very thick walls, which did not, in the end, protect them, looking out through the windows in those walls. Above the doorway, a Latin passage. This is a doorway out of that room. Sic vos non vobis nidificatis aves means, thus do ye, not for yourselves, make nests, ye birds. Or in more user-friendly form, you birds make nests, but not for yourselves. Though these rather radical ancestors of ours were very much Christian, that is not a passage from the Bible, which tells you something of their spirit. It's a quote from the ancient Roman poet we know as Virgil, from around the time of Jesus. It also happens to be the motto of the Bank of England. Random piece of information. Apparently, it's a motto for many institutions. Our religious ancestors built theological nests that we have inherited, but nests for nurturing religious freedom, but they've been rebuilt and remodeled again and again, such that our ancestors would hardly recognize them now. They would likely not recognize us as kin. These nests now hold such wide room for religious beliefs among our members that one is not required to turn to the teachings of Jesus at all, unless you want to, or to believe in God, unless you do, or to even think of oneself as having religious beliefs. And although that tree of Judeo-Christian religions we saw earlier shows Universalism and Unitarianism branching off relatively recently, the original issues for each of our parent traditions arose as soon as that compelling, revolutionary, and charismatic Middle Eastern Jewish teacher named Yeshua, or Jesus, was executed. His followers and their followers had to sort out, in the pain of that loss, who Jesus was exactly. What was his purpose and for whom? It's no surprise that people did not agree on the answers to those questions. There were many versions. Was Jesus human or divine, or a human prophet with a direct hotline to the voice of God? Was Jesus God? There were many answers claimed, but an early general consensus seems to have arrived at the idea that Jesus was more than human. They got that far. However, as to Jesus' exact nature and relationship to God, there were two main schools of belief that kind of came to the top. One was belief that Jesus was more than human, but not equal to God, not as godly as God. And the other, the belief that Jesus was exactly co-equal with God. Now, by the year 324, the many squabbling Christian factions started getting on the nerves of the newly converted Roman Emperor Constantine I. Actually, the squabbling was getting in the way of uniting his people so the empire could focus on ruling the known world. So in 325, Constantine stuck the various Christian leaders in a room together in Nicaea and said, "Don't come out till you figure this out," or something to that effect. The belief that won out in that room at Nicaea, championed by a man named Athanasius, taught that Jesus was co-equal to God, as godly as God. That was the one that won. The belief that Jesus was special, but not as godly as God, which had been championed in that debate by Arius, was pushed aside, though it then dominated thought in the Eastern Empire for decades, until it was eventually kind of pushed to the far edges of Christian thought. When beliefs about the humanness of Jesus cropped up centuries later in Europe, our Unitarian ancestors were labeled Arians after Arius. It was pejorative, right, to be labeled an Arian. As the newly victorious faction of Christians developed their concept of Jesus as being co-equal to God, in order to make all the theological pieces fit, they eventually developed this notion of the Holy Trinity, God being three equal entities, Father, Son, Spirit, all the same being, but also at the same time, three separate beings. A formulation that was rooted in Greek philosophy, so that wouldn't have been too unusual. Now, ever since, our ancestors were the ones who, in their own times and ways, grimaced whenever they tried to apply logic to the idea of the Trinity. It didn't make sense to them. It didn't make head sense nor heart sense. Instead, they believed in the unity of God as a single being, not three. So they were labeled eventually Unitarians because they believed in the unity of God. God is one. Egios Isten is still the message emblazoned at the entries of the Unitarian churches in Transylvania. Unitarians, that's where the name comes from, as opposed to Trinitarians. The thing about the Council of Nicaea, where the factions duked it out to come up with the right Christian beliefs, is that it shifted Christianity from being an ethical religion centered in doing the right thing. Think of Jesus' messages about caring for the poor, the widowed, the orphan, the stranger, about giving up your wealth. It shifted from an ethical religion about doing the right thing to a creedal religion centered in having the right or the correct beliefs about Jesus. That was a change that came out of that. In significant ways, it shifted Christianity from being the religion of Jesus to being a religion about Jesus. And thereafter, in the dominant Western Christianity, what made one a true Christian was having the correct beliefs. Thus, the rise of various heresies, the choices to reject some of those correct beliefs. There's our path as a tradition. Both Unitarian and Universalist ideas, or heresies, or blasphemies, kept cropping up throughout Christianity all across all these centuries. But the powers that be have typically been quick to try to squash them down again. One person called it theological whack-a-mole. Whenever it crops up, try to push it down. No small number of our ancestors were burned at the stake. Servetus, a Spaniard who had written a book called On the Error of the Trinities, was burned by Calvin in Geneva, Switzerland, with his book on the errors of the Trinity chained to his leg. The rejection of the idea of the Trinity was the most visible heresy of Unitarians, but Unitarian Universalist beliefs both imply and lead to something more. The belief that God is one automatically highlighted how Jesus is different from God, and therefore eventually highlighted the human aspects of Jesus, right? If Jesus is not the same as God, it highlighted the human aspects. And the path that our ancestors typically took to get to Unitarian beliefs was through logic, through prioritizing the application of reason to their understanding of religion. That's often how they got there. Over time, Unitarians came to be characterized in general by their prioritizing of religious freedom for everybody, their understanding of Jesus as an exemplary human being to be emulated but not worshiped, their view that the Bible was a product of human beings from another time and should be interpreted that way, just like any other writing. The idea that original sin was not true, that they didn't believe that we were born flawed, and their belief that human beings are saved in this life, in this world, by cultivating our own goodness, our own character. Freedom, reason, tolerance, Unitarians proclaimed, and deeds, not creeds. So we're a non-creedal religion now through that. Unitarianism even spawned its own heretics. The moment they declared their true Unitarianism, they had people branching off. Imagine. In this case, the transcendentalists, who claim that the most important source of religious knowledge isn't a sacred text or a religious community or a tradition, certainly not a minister. It's one's own direct experience of the sacred, of the divine, especially its experience through nature. So they were saying churches aren't even necessary. You can do this directly. And what about the Universalists? Let's sing another verse of the song first. Look inside your souls, the kindling of the hearth fire, pilgrims new. Find the spirit always restless, find it in each mind and heart. Touch and hold that ancient yearning, kindling for a newfound truth. Touch and hold that ancient yearning. It's so nice to have you playing, Randy. Another question Jesus' followers needed to figure out very early on was, what was Jesus' purpose? And who was Jesus' life and message for? If Jesus and his teachings and his life were the gateway to eternal life, was that access only for Jewish people? Only for Jesus' followers? What about people from other countries, other religions? This question carried forward eventually asked, who gets to go to heaven after they die? And who is going to hell at the hands of a punitive God who does not necessarily forgive and forget? The heretical idea that eventually became named universalism is the idea that God is completely and absolutely loving, and that everyone will be welcomed into eternal life with God in the end. Everyone. Even the people we don't like. Even the people who we believe have behaved badly. Jesus' sacrifice, they believed, had rescued all human beings for all time. Besides, they figured, how could a finite human sin, even a really bad one, ever outweigh the capacity and love of an infinite God? Didn't make sense. The name Universalist comes from this idea of universal salvation, that everyone will be saved in the end, universally. There's where we get our names, Unitarian, Universalist. Now, some Universalists believe that any punishment for harmful behavior would play out in this life. If there's to be hell, it'll happen here. There's no such thing as hell later, they said. No such thing as eternal punishment. But one problem with that is that some people seem to get away with a whole lot of bad behavior. The Restorationists were the Universalists who therefore believed that everyone will eventually be restored to God, but that some people would need to spend a chunk of time in an afterlife timeout corner first. Bottom line, they said, God is love, period, and loves everyone. The Universalists proclaimed there is no hell, at least not beyond this world. Now, one of the reasons this idea of universal salvation kept getting whack-a-moled over the past 2,000 years is that the threat of punishment, the threat of hell, is believed by some to be a compelling, in fact, a vital way to get humans to behave well, or to behave as a tradition wants people to behave for their own sake. It's a belief that plays out in the parenting style, wherein painful punishment is believed to be important for the good of the child. Spare the rod. In that perspective, it will be too dangerous for everyone if we can all just believe and do whatever we want, if there aren't discouraging and huge consequences for forbidden behaviors. Universalism was seen not as merely a different belief, but as a dangerous belief that would lead humanity astray. and you couldn't have that infecting the population. It may help you to know that people are still being expelled from Christian denominations and congregations for holding universalist beliefs, that everyone's going to be saved. This has not ended. That's still resonant in this world. Universalists came to this view of an absolutely loving God and a universal salvation from many different directions, sometimes through their careful interpretation of Scripture, but perhaps most often through the wisdom of their hearts. They could not fathom an infinitely loving God being any less loving than they themselves would be toward their own children. Why should we expect anything less of an all-powerful deity, they said. John Murray from our story earlier was once preaching his universalist message about God's infinite love in Boston to a packed house when someone threw a stone through the window behind the pulpit and missed his head by just a few inches. So he picked up the stone and said that the arguments against universalist beliefs were solid and weighty, but neither rational nor convincing. The universalist belief in the infinite love of God led universalists to believe that perhaps they themselves should emulate that love as best they could, right here, with the people and the beings around them, including all in their embrace, just as God did. Along the way, many Unitarians came to hold universalist views, and many Universalists came to hold Unitarian views. And I've said before, they dated for a long time. But finally, in 1961, they merged to form the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. Each tradition by then had come to prioritize theological openness and diversity and freedom of religious thought. And in very halting and imperfect and stumbling starts and stops, to try to prioritize other kinds of openness and diversity as well. A journey that continues. This is where they both got to. We have to allow space for people to have their own beliefs, make their own journey. Now, I don't expect that many of us are wrestling with the questions about the extent to which Jesus was human and or divine, or with questions about the existence of hell, though you may be. But before we ask, finally, what any of this has to do with us now, I invite us to share in this community's ritual acknowledging the joys and sorrows that we hold as we gather. So I invite you to let your body unwind for a moment. If there's something that's helpful to relax or release or move, I invite you to let that happen. As we're preparing to search our own hearts, I'll name for us all the concern and grief about current attempts to dismantle democracy and challenges to so many of the values we hold. I would name those suffering in the ceasefire in Gaza, Israel. I would name those at risk and those grieving losses in the aftermath of fires. On a celebratory note, I would name the really beautiful potluck on Martin Luther King Day on Monday, thanks to a number of you, chance to be community together. And on another celebratory note, I'll note that today is Marilyn Winter's 96th birthday. There's Marilyn. If you want to wave, the camera would be that way. Happy birthday, Marilyn, this very day. So I invite you to notice your breathing once again, right? This is the begin again, keep coming back to the breathing. We're reinforcing over time. You don't have to do anything with your breathing, I suggest, other than notice it and perhaps to follow it. Try following your breath all the way in and all the way out. Each time, all the way in and all the way out. And the moment your mind wanders to the grocery list, just come back and begin again, Oh, I'm breathing all the way in, following all the way out. From this place, what do you notice in you? It might be a physical sensation. Could be anywhere in your body. Could be warmth on your skin. Could be a joint that's hurting. Could be a sense of butterflies somewhere. You might have a sense of a feeling, an emotion. Maybe it's something very obvious and clear, or maybe not. What might the sensations in your body or the emotions you sense, what might they be telling you, reminding you, calling your attention toward? And what meaningful joys or sorrows are you wanting to acknowledge today in this ritual? What's going on in you that's important? Those in the room have a chance to place a stone in the bowl of water. Those on Zoom have a chance to type into the chat or to type a 0 or O as the equivalent of a stone. I invite you to let the gentle weightiness of the stone, if you're here, hold all that you hold when you place it in the bowl of water, and to know that that bowl of water is us too, as well as everything larger than us that is holding you. Invite us to hold the silence, to listen to the prayers in our hearts, to stay with our breathing, perhaps, even as we're aware of each other, even as people come forward and place a stone. few stones for all the rest, and the words and wisdom of Leah Ongiri. Here we are together, each facing our different human tasks, or maybe the same central one, to embrace the life lessons that life delivers, to discern and respond as we grow, to refuse harm and cherish flourishing. May we know ourselves as vessels of infinite possibility, holders of each other's heartaches and tales of joy alike, weavers of one story in which we each have our part. So one final verse of this song, Sing Out Praises, words written by Mark DeWolf, who was one of the very first openly gay ministers to serve in our tradition. Stand we now upon the threshold, facing futures yet unknown. Hearts behind us, wayside hostel, built by those who know wild roads. Guard we ere their sacred embers, carried in our minds and hearts. Guard we ere their sacred embers. I love Mark's words, really. The sacred embers that we carry in our minds and hearts, and that we Unitarian Universalists guard for those who will come after us, aren't so much the specific heresies or beliefs of our ancestors, the particular beliefs they held about Jesus or God or the Bible. The ember that we carry is their willingness to be heretical in the direction of increasing openness and inclusion. Their insistence on making room for themselves and therefore for us to hold differing and evolving beliefs without coercion, to prioritize each person's personal integrity and conscience and desire to search for an aligning of one's heart and mind and knowledge and beliefs about everything that matters, to have our own personal alignment in us. Their sacred embers that we carry and guard are the courage and the commitment to choose what to believe and why, to be heretics, and the courage and commitment to protect and support other people's ability to do the same. But not merely to do this alone, without any point of reference but our own perspective. Rather, the nest they built asks us to do our personal journeying together, to gather at the rivers that flow from love as we understand it, in the company of those who also commit to seeking truth together, even if in our own ways and directions. This is why pluralism is named as one of the core aspirational Unitarian Universalist values, one of the core expressions of love among us and in the world. A Unitarian ancestor in Transylvania, Francis David, was supposed to have said, "We need not think alike to love alike." Actually, that's really a quote that comes from Methodist founder John Wesley, who asked the question our ancestors claimed in spirit, "Though we cannot think alike, may we not love alike?" And oh, is this not a challenge for the moment, for this day? 9 or 10 years ago, I could have taken this value and this ideal for granted. We're good, we're on our way. But these days, that ember that we inherited feels more important and valuable than ever. It also remains always one of our frontiers in Unitarian Universalism as a whole and in this community too. Because that outward moving circle of inclusion we like to claim always has challenging growing edges, right? That never is finished. And so the question is always, what's our current edge? As we transition from our January theme of story to our February theme of inclusion, where that growing edge is stretched, on the way to our March theme of trust, I wonder what heresy or heresies do you feel that you hold or have held in your life? What belief or perspective do you have that does not appear to be held by most of the people around you, that perhaps doesn't feel supported, that is maybe even dismissed or denigrated, maybe whack-a-mole in the circles you're part of? Whether that circle is the wider community or the culture or the nation, or it's right here in the life of this congregation, or it's in your own personal circle of friends and family. What's that idea, that perspective you hold that feels ever more necessary to have in alignment? So your head, your heart, your mind, your spirit can all be in true alignment. I ask the question to plant a seed for us as we move through inclusion and toward trust. I'm going to name in advance that at some point along the way, I'm going to ask if you're willing to name your heresy, the thing that you hold that doesn't feel included, welcomed in the circles that are important to you. So this is the early notice. So you have time to feel that out, both what it is and whether you'd consider naming that out loud in one of our services. What's the heresy that you hold? I gave today's service the title Heretics in Good Company, meaning the good company of our UU ancestors. And I'm going to do a series in February, March, and the beginning of April on UU history, which actually walks through the specific stories of some of our ancestors. So I invite you to join in with that. But it also meant the company right here, this company of saints, even if you're here for the very first time, right? This company of people gathered who's holding at least a desire, but ideally also this commitment to allow space for us each to have our own path. It's good company, imperfect company, yes, human company, yes, but good company. Heretics in good company. Our task as a Unitarian Universalist community is to find ways to ensure that as much as possible, we gather and speak and share and act and explore our choices, our heresies, remembering to ground whatever we do in our central value of love. Can we do this lovingly? Given our personal life journeys, our spiritual journeys, and the state of the nation, what will our shared next heresies be, I wonder? I have a feeling we're going to find out. May we be willing to honor all of them and the choices they ask of us. So may we be.
When we think of stories that are untold, ignored, or actively suppressed, consider those living among us in Nevada County who have no home. Each has a story, past, present, and future. Our community partner this month is Sierra Roots, and 50% of your offerings will be shared with them. Their mission statement spells out that they are dedicated to listening to and collaborating with chronically homeless people. It's a relationship-based approach, one person at a time. Their vision is a community in which everyone has a chance to heal and a place to call home. As the offering baskets are passed, the slide will tell you additional ways to give, and we encourage you to visit the Sierra Roots website as well. Thank you for your generosity and compassion. We dedicate these gifts to doing our part to ensure that all stories can be heard and that all people can be seen, safe, and cared for. Thank you.
Thanks to those who are setting up and those who brought and who will clean up after refreshments today, Michael, Cynthia, Carol, Shannon, Janet, and maybe you. Thanks to Shannon Dooley Miller and Lindsay for spending such precious time with our young people. Thanks to Corey Silva for being our lay pastoral care person, and George for assisting today, or for Shanti for the setting, which we coordinated without knowing it. To Eileen for being our just steady host on the chat and on Zoom. Thank you. As always, Cypress and Paul, thank you for going along with all our needs from week to week. George and Janet, thank you very much for reading. It was nice to have the two of you read today. That was really lovely. And Cheryl, thanks for being a worship associate. Randy, thank you very much for bringing music with Toby today. UU 101 is kind of the first one-session introductory. Let's find out a little bit more about this tradition. That will be next Sunday after the service. Please join us just to find out more, but it's also a chance to connect. And I really want to celebrate this Good Trouble designation. There aren't that many congregations in the country that get designated as Good Trouble congregations, and it's because this congregation wrote 30,000 postcards, I think about 33, right? And this was during the election. And those of us who are here know that this is due in an entirely huge part to Gail Johnson Vaughn. Who invested time, talent, and treasure hugely to help that happen, to help all of you participate too. That was really beautiful, Gail, thank you. I calculated, if you put those 33,000 postcards end to end, it would cover almost 3 miles, those postcards, yeah. Volunteers you'll notice the building is being spruced up thanks to our Facilities Exploration Committee and the folks who are assisting, looking for some help with furniture movers, cleaners, tapers, and painters. That would be really helpful. You can contact the treasurer, who happens to be Gail Schultz right here, if you're in the room. As always, Side with Love t-shirts. You're going to see some yellow t-shirts in the room. Elizabeth Rose is spearheading. If you want to get a Side with Love shirt, they're taking orders, and so they can do a collective order and get a discount. So, sure. Carl and Keith. So look for those yellow shirts. When we go to a big public event and all wear them, we really stand out as a body of people, I have to say. So I encourage you to do that if you don't have one. And as always, check out our website for lots more information. Sign up for the newsletters. I'm going to do one more thing, with your permission. Each year, there's a banner parade of the congregation banners at our big annual gathering, and they asked for a photo of the congregation. So, if you don't want to be seen, you can hide behind somebody else. Well, I invite you to look glad to be here. And come on in. We should have, come on in. I'm going to take a picture. Ready? 1, 2, 3. I'm going to do another one. 1, 2, 1, 27, 6, 5. Thank you. And our closing song kind of sends us into the future. This was written as a song to point out that it's really our younger people who are going to be leading the way into the future. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and to sing with our heritage, our embers, our own passions, and our own heresies in mind and heart. From the light of days remembered burns a beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way, promise finds fulfillment, and our future can begin. From the stories of our living rings a song both brave and free, calling pilgrims still to witness to the life of liberty. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the dreams of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, and our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin.
Our closing words today are by the Reverend Scott Taylor. Let us drink from the stories that sustain us all. We gather as a house of stories. As we learn of those who have gone before, the way in front of us becomes clearer. As we weave together our individual tales into a common story, our loneliness lessens, and the ever-present web of our oneness is revealed. As we listen deeply to each other's difficult stories with tenderness and trust, we descend into the longings and learnings, hopes and fears of the humanity we share. Beneath the wells from which we drink, there is a deeper well that feeds them all. Come, let us tell each other tales of our thirst. Let us drink from the stories that sustain us all. And now we'll join in the community benediction and the extinguishing of the chalice. Let us carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again. And see you next Sunday for Word Counts.
And the community business meeting in a little bit.
Oh, yeah, 12:30, don't go home. Okay, and refreshments in the meantime.